Hey everyone, so we are back, and in this episode we're going to look at how you actually light something. Now, if you imported this soundstage using Cine Designer, there's actually a light in it, and you've already lit something, so that's cool. But that's a native Cinema 4D light. We're going to use some Cine Designer lights that are, like the real world. That's the whole point of Cine Designer. Besides the cameras, honestly, the camera part's pretty powerful. You can do a lot with just the cameras for blocking, but it's a lot of fun to light too, because we are filmmakers, we're cinematographers, we want to light stuff, okay? So let's click Cine Designer, here we are. So let's go to our lighting truck. Now what to build first? The lighting stuff gets pretty deep. Lighting in 3D can be kind of tricky, but I've tried to simplify it here and I've tried to relate it back to the real world. That's the whole idea. So we're on the lighting truck and let's select a light. Now there's a bunch of lights here and you can click them and you can see little video previews of each one. Right? But let's do like a simple one. Let's do an Arri T1, and you'll see there's one that's hung and one that's on a stand. Okay? You have to choose the right one depending on what you're doing. Let's pick the one on a stand. Next, we're going to pick our stand. Now, in this build, I only have 3, but I'll be building more as people request them. Definitely want to get a scissor lift and like a cherry picker in here to be able to visualize some bigger shoots, but most people don't get those, so it's not really like a core. I don't consider that a core need for Cine Designer. Most people get down with a baby stand or a combo stand and a goal post. That was nice, and I put a goal post in here too. So let's choose our baby stand and no modifier. And let's click Build Light. Close. So here is our Cine Designer light. This is getting exciting, right? So what I want to show here is just like when the camera came in, we had a native Cinema 4D camera on there. This is a native Cinema 4D light, but for right now, it's actually not that useful. So I'm going to turn off lights because we just want to see the Cine Designer light. Let's go look at that Cine Designer light. So here's an Arri T1 representation. And here is a Matthews 3-riser beefy baby stand, both modeled pretty accurately. Let's look over here. I'm going to select both of them. You see that they came together. They came separate now. When you use any of the builder scripts, the builders, they're going to come as separate objects like this. And typically when you click one of these buttons, all of these things come together in one group. So the dolly is all one group, but these things are in separate groups. And we haven't talked about groups yet, but we will. So if you click the baby stand, you select it, and you go to the user data, you'll see that there's stand height. Oop. And as you change it, the light will go up and down. So we'll leave it like here. If you move the stand, the light will come with it. Okay, and I'm trying to make this as logical as possible. You move the stand and the light comes with it. If you select the light, you actually can't move it. Okay, so this is something you're gonna have to get used to with Cine Designer for now. I might be changing this style in a future, but for now, I personally like this because it allows me to be modular and actually make my own rigs very quickly, and you will be able to as well. So you just got to get used to that for now. You select the stand, and that can change the height, and you can move it around and you can rotate it. I also have, for fun, you can close the legs, because for people that want to do education with this, like myself, it's going to be cool to have the stand folded up and like fly out into the scene and then open up and show it how it opens. I think that's cool. I put it in there. It was a lot of extra work to put that in there, so I hope someone else enjoys that besides me. If you select the light with that little octagon, or here, I suggest selecting from up here. It's better. It's a little bit more precise. You can now pan and tilt this light. So that's panning, tilting. But you're like, hey, Matt, like that light's not on. How do I turn it on? So let's first of all turn off our overhead light. And so this is a native Cinema 4D light. It's called an area light. We'll talk about that later. Click the little check sign next to it, and it goes away. It's still there, but it's not on. So now we're in Cinema 4D native lighting. So there's really no light in the scene right now. And this is what it looks like when there's no light. It's just so that you can see the scene. What we want to do is, again, you have to select the actual light itself. And you're going to go to light controls. And actually, I think this is going to look a little different because this is pre-release when I'm recording these. I'm going to change a couple more things so you can change the color. I'll have to show you the color in a different video, but turn on enabled. So the light is on, it's just really faint, okay? So what we want to change is next is the intensity here. So let's change this to something like 5,000. Now, what does that number mean? We'll talk about that in later episodes. I'll just say for now that like an Arri T1, a T5, a T12, a T24, these small lights, big lights, essentially in Cinema 4D, they're all the same light. They're a spotlight. But what we can do is we can program them to have relative light values to each other. And we're going to have to decide that as a community how we want to do that. I have a system that I'm currently using for myself, but we'll talk about that in future videos. And as people start to actually use it, and especially people who work in the field, we're going to find out what works the best. You know, it's a bit of an experiment, but it does work right now. But as far as figuring out the best way to do that, I'd like to find that out together, or at least I'm going to keep working on it. And as new render engines come out and new people come up with different methods, I'm all ears. I'm all ears to hear that. So right now we're currently using lumens. So we've rated this light at 5,000 lumens, and you can go Google lumens. Lumens is a metric, scientific measurement, and it basically relates to like how much light total a light source is emitting. Almost like a volume, I believe, is how lumens work. It's different than lux and foot candles. Now, we're not taking light readings. We're talking about how much light in total is emitted from that light. It's a different thing that you probably think of being on set. But this speaks to how, not difficult, but how complicated creating real world lights are in the computer. It requires a little bit more thinking than you probably have ever had to do about real world lights. But anyway, brighter, darker intensity for now. Just pick the number. You'll find it. This is pretty WYSIWYG, by the way. What you see is what you get. This is pretty close to how it will render in most cases. So let's focus this light. I'm panning up and down. Let's just hit our person with it like right like that. And the last thing we can do is flood and spot. So it goes from 10 degrees to 54 degrees. And that's pretty accurate as well for the Arri T1 anyway. Each light has its own photometrics built into it. So that's pretty accurate. So let's check it out. Let's hit Apple R. And it's going to kind of render it out and give it a shadow. And it's going to make it look a little bit more realistic. And we'll talk about how to make this increasingly more and more realistic. So this is the least amount of realism you can have. This is the default Cinema 4D renderer. It only gets better looking from here. And I'm going to show you one thing if you want to go play on your own, because I'm not going to show you all the lights right now. First thing is that if you go to display, you're in Garage, that will show you the lighting. But if you don't want to look at the lighting until you hit render, you can go back to this. Okay. And the last thing, before I leave you, we're going to do animation in the next episode. And this will give you an overview of like pretty much everything you need to know to go start playing with it kind of knowledgeably. Is you want to go to render settings again up here. You're going to go to effect, and you're going to want to click global illumination. Now don't worry about any of the settings, just leave the default settings. The difference between global illumination and not global illumination is that before that light came out of this fixture here, came out of the T1, it hit our person, it hit the floor, and it stopped. And that's not how light works in the real world. In the real world, light comes out of somewhere, comes out of a light, hits the ground, hits a person, but then it bounces. And it keeps bouncing. And that's called global illumination, essentially, in 3D. So to have that effect where light hits something and then bounces like the real world, like you're going to want to do, you need to turn on global illumination in the settings, and we'll hit Apple R. And we're going to see something a little bit different. And I'm going to actually just sit here and watch this render and kind of talk about it. I think it's important. What you're seeing now, you'll see that the object's like being lit from below. Looks kind of weird, right? That is the bounce lighting. It's calculating the direct lighting, which is called diffuse lighting, and it's talking about the indirect lighting, which is happening off the floor. So not only is the program calculating the light coming from the unit, it's also hitting the floor and bouncing up, and it's calculating that as well. Now, depending on your computer speed, this will be fast or slow. And as you expect higher quality from the system, it will be slower. That's not my fault. This is just how 3D works. The more realistic, the longer it takes to render. Now, my computer, a MacBook Pro, again, pretty fully loaded MacBook Pro, is usually a little bit faster than this, but I'm doing a screen recording, which I think is pretty intense for the computer to handle. But overall, if you're used to 3D, this is pretty fast for this quality. And I know this coming from Arnold, coming from V-Ray, coming from Maxwell, having used RenderMan, having used a little, well, for Octane, this is slow, but I've used a lot of different render engines. In Cinema 4D native and the physical renderer, I really like a lot if you have broadcast and up. Really nice. Look at the shadow quality. The bounce lighting is there. It's pretty good, and I really like that. So if you want to go play with space lights, Kino flows, I think the diffusions, actually I took off the GI for the diffusions. A lot of the lights require global illumination to be on to play with them. So I wanted to show you that in this video so you can go play with all the lights and have them actually work. So that is our look at lighting in Cinema 4D with Cine Designer. There's a lot more to talk about as far as how the system is designed to work to visualize different types of lighting. I've pretty much figured out how to visualize every single type of light, but it might take a little bit for you to understand them. So go play with them on your own. You can't break it. If you break it, just make a new scene, start again. And I'll be covering in more depth each light, how to use them, how they work, how to tweak them, that sort of thing, how to make it look realistic. Again, this is a visualizer. It's not a real world simulation of lighting. It's a way to visualize lighting pretty accurately, but it's not like this doesn't work exactly like the real world. There are some cheats. There's things that are easier, and there's things that are kind of like you have to kind of fake it. But overall, as far as a solution for visualizing lighting and camera work, this is one of the best things that I've ever seen. And I've been trying to build something like this, and I have been building it for quite a while. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about animation. Our very first animation, how do we make a camera move? And we're going to look at the Techno Crane for that. It's going to be fun. So I'll see you guys on the next episode.